She stood alone in the freezing dark, but jackets stitched with secrets no one dared to speak of, clutching her twin daughters and a past the world had buried. He was a billionaire, trying to outrun his own ghosts, until fate parked them outside the same broken motel. What happened next wasn't chance. It was the kind of moment that rewrites lives and reveals the silent warriors among us. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's jump into the story. It was just after midnight when the snow started falling hard. Thick flakes drifted from the black sky like quiet pieces of ash. The road was nearly empty, silent except for the soft crunch of snow under tires and the hum of an old streetlight that flickered outside a roadside motel in rural Wyoming. A sleek gray SUV sat parked near the entrance. Its engine was off, but inside sat a man, hands resting on the wheel, eyes fixed on something outside. His name was Nolan Merritt. He was 48, the kind of man who once spoke on stages in front of thousands, the kind who used to be featured in business magazines and invited to speak at leadership events. But now, all of that felt like it belonged to another life. Tonight, he was just a man lost in thought, worn down by grief and silence. He hadn't planned to be here. He had left his home in Denver 2 days ago, driving west without direction, searching for something he couldn't name. Ever since the 1-year anniversary of his wife's death, his house had felt like a museum, cold, still, and too quiet to bear. He didn't know why he had stopped here. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the glow of the motel sign through the snow. Or maybe it was the woman. She stood beneath the porch light, barely visible through the falling snow, holding the hands of 2 small girls, twins. Her posture was firm, her shoulders squared like a soldier standing guard. The girls huddled close to her legs, shivering in oversized coats. The woman's jacket was thin, army green, and worn at the edges. And stitched on the shoulder, half hidden beneath frost, was a small faded insignia. Nolan's breath caught when he saw it. He knew that symbol. It belonged to a classified military mission, Operation Marrow Peak, one that he had once helped fund behind the scenes. According to the reports, there had been no survivors, and yet here she was. He watched as she spoke to the motel clerk, her voice calm but tired. She handed over what looked like her last few dollars, trying to arrange a room. He couldn't hear her words, but he saw the clerk shake his head, pointing to the broken heater and offering a shrug. The woman didn't argue. She only nodded and looked down at her daughters, pulling them closer. Nolan opened his door and stepped into the cold. The wind bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. He walked inside the motel office and spoke to the clerk quietly. He pulled out his card and paid for the week. No questions, no hesitation. When the woman turned toward him, her expression shifted. Suspicion, confusion, pride. She stepped forward. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice firm. "I know," Nolan replied, "but no one survives alone." The woman stared at him for a moment, her breath visible in the freezing air. Then she nodded, once, and led her daughters toward the room. That night, she did. Her name was Violet Hale. She was 29, a former military medic, with scars she didn't show and memories she didn't speak of. She had once crawled through burning sand, with shrapnel in her leg, and a dying teammate on her back. She had survived what no one else did. And now, she was here, alone, broke, and doing everything she could to protect her daughters, Juno and Ivy. She sat on the edge of the motel bed, one hand on each girl, eyes on the door, waiting. Kindness wasn't something she trusted, not anymore, not after all she had seen, not after being left behind. But in the morning, something changed. Just outside her door sat a small basket. Inside were 2 pairs of wool gloves, a handful of fresh fruit, and a note. "Let them feel warm. You don't owe me anything." No signature, just that. She stood there for a moment, holding the note. She didn't know this man, didn't know why he had helped, but something in her chest shifted. Not much, just enough to breathe a little easier. Nolan didn't come by. He didn't knock. He didn't expect thanks. He only drove into town later that day and returned quietly to the motel, staying in the room next to hers. And the next morning, another item appeared. A small book for children, a pair of fresh socks, a new blanket. Violet said nothing, but her daughters began to smile more. Juno started humming softly as she colored. Ivy whispered that the nice man was like a snow angel. They didn't know who he was. They didn't ask, but Violet was watching. She hadn't let herself trust anyone in years, not after what happened in Syria, not after she was forced to disappear. But now, in the quiet of winter, someone was reaching through her silence, not with words, but with care. And slowly, day by day, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was room to hope again. The days that followed were cold, but something in the air had changed. Violet still woke early, her body tense, her instincts sharp. She checked the locks twice. She looked out the window every hour. But she also began to notice something else. Small signs of care that arrived without warning, without expectation. Each morning, a new item appeared outside the motel door. A box of diapers, a small stuffed bear with one ear slightly bent, a hand-knit scarf, soft and warm, clearly made by someone who cared about comfort more than appearance. Violet never saw him leave the gifts. She only knew it was Nolan. He kept his distance. No knocking, no conversations. He simply came and went, always quiet, always respectful. Sometimes she saw him standing near his SUV, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the snowy hills in the distance. He never looked her way unless she looked first. And yet, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt full of understanding. Violet wasn't used to this kind of silence. In her world, silence had always meant danger. Silence had come before the gunfire, after the loss, in the hours she'd sat alone, bandaging her own wounds with shaking hands. But now, it felt different. It felt safe. Her daughters noticed too. Juno giggled more. Ivy started asking questions again. They were still shy around Nolan, hiding behind their mother when he passed by. But they watched him, and slowly they began to wave. One afternoon, Violet stepped out of her room just as Nolan was placing something near her door. He froze, unsure whether to speak or retreat. She looked down. It was a paperback book, bedtime stories from around the world. Inside was a folded note. No words, just a hand-drawn star and a smiley face. She looked up. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice flat but curious. Nolan hesitated. Then he answered softly, "Because someone once helped me, and I never got to thank them." It wasn't the answer she expected, but it was enough. Later that night, she sat with her daughters and read them a story from the book. Their heads rested on her shoulders. The heater clicked and hummed. For the first time in months, Violet felt a piece of peace. The next morning, she left something for Nolan. A simple note on a torn corner of cardboard. "We're okay. Thank you." He found it before sunrise, smiled faintly, and kept it in his coat pocket. As the week continued, the motel seemed less lonely. Violet started walking with the girls in the snow, letting them stomp through slush and laugh at their footprints. She let herself breathe more. She still didn't talk much, but when she passed Nolan, she offered a nod. And one evening, as he carried firewood inside, Ivy ran up and handed him a drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands under a snowflake. "That's you," she whispered. "You helped Mama." Nolan crouched to her level, took the drawing gently and said, "Thank you. It's the best gift I've gotten in a long time." Inside her room, Violet watched from the window. She didn't cry. She rarely did anymore. But something inside her warmed. That night, after the girls fell asleep, she sat by the small table and stared at the jacket hanging on the back of the chair. Her military jacket, the one that still held dried blood along the hem, the one she hadn't worn since the desert. Stitched into the inner lining was a patch, Marrow Peak Unit 14. She pulled it close, fingers brushing over the patch, remembering the sand, the explosion, the fire. She remembered dragging her team leader across broken rocks, her leg torn, her lungs burning. She remembered the silence of the radio, the empty sky, the way her hands trembled as she kept her promise to get him to safety. But she had never made it home, not officially. The world thought she had died. It was easier that way. Easier to disappear, to protect the girls, to bury the past. But now, someone had seen her. Not just with his eyes, but truly seen her. She decided to tell him. The next day, she knocked on Nolan's door. He opened it slowly, surprised. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. He nodded, stepping aside. Inside, she sat on the small couch, her daughters nearby, playing quietly with the toys he'd given them. She took a deep breath, then spoke. "My name is Violet Hale. I served as a combat medic in Operation Marrow Peak. I was listed as dead, but I lived. And the only reason I'm standing here is because someone believed in me when no one else did." Nolan didn't speak right away. His face had gone pale. "I know that mission," he said quietly. "I helped fund the surveillance for it. I read the reports. They said no one made it out." Violet nodded. That's what they wanted the world to believe. They sat in silence. Not awkward, not tense, just still. "Thank you for helping us," she said finally. "I didn't expect it. I didn't trust it. But you kept showing up, and I needed that more than you know." Nolan looked at her, and for the first time since they met, his voice cracked. "Maybe we both did." The motel room was still when Violet opened the closet. The girls were asleep, curled up under a quilt made from old shirts. Their soft breathing filled the space with calm. But Violet's hands were not calm. They moved slowly, almost hesitantly, as she reached for the jacket that had followed her through more than one war. She hadn't touched it in months, not since that night in the desert when her world cracked in half. But now, after talking to Nolan, after hearing the weight in his voice when he recognized the mission's name, something inside her told her it was time. She laid the jacket on the bed. It was worn, faded. The green fabric had dulled to a shade closer to gray. The zippers were stiff. One button was missing. And stitched beneath the collar was the patch. Marrow Peak Unit 14. The one the government had buried under layers of silence. Violet ran her fingers over the patch, remembering the sound of gunfire, the screams, the moment she had realized no one was coming to save them. But she had lived, and that fact still didn't sit right with her. It never had. As the morning light crept into the room, Violet folded the jacket carefully, tucked it under her arm, and stepped outside. Nolan was already there, sipping coffee from a paper cup, standing by his SUV, like he had every morning since they met. He looked up and gave a quiet nod. Violet walked over and held out the jacket. "I want to show you something," she said. He didn't speak. He just took the jacket, turned it over in his hands, and paused at the patch. Then, he looked at her. "I've only ever seen this in redacted files," he said. "They buried the whole thing." "I know," she replied. "I was supposed to stay buried too." They stood in silence for a moment, and then she began to tell him the story. Not the short version, not the one she had told others to make them stop asking questions. This time, she told it all. She told him about the ambush, about dragging her team leader across burning sand, about patching his chest with trembling hands while bullets cracked around her. She told him how she kept him alive for 2 days, using only gauze, broken radio parts, and hope. And she told him how, when help never came, he made her promise to survive. She never forgot his final words, "Don't let this be the end." Nolan listened, every word. His cup went cold in his hand, but he didn't move. And when she finished, he looked down at the jacket again. "You are never just a survivor," he said. "You are the mission's last heartbeat." Violet didn't reply. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, someone had seen the whole of her, scars, silence, and strength, and it changed everything. Over the next week, things began to shift. Nolan made some calls, quiet ones, to people he still trusted. Within days, Violet received a letter, official recognition of her service. It didn't erase the years of being invisible, but it was a start. He also offered her something unexpected, a role at one of his community outreach centers, helping other veterans who had slipped through the cracks. She hesitated at first. Her instinct was always to say no, but this time she said yes. "Only part-time," she warned. He smiled. "Whatever works for you." The job gave her purpose. It gave her structure, and slowly it began to heal something in her. She helped others find housing. She taught basic first aid to teenage volunteers. And she saw in their eyes the same fire she once carried into every battlefield. The girls adjusted too. Ivy started drawing more. Juno talked about making friends at the park nearby. They laughed louder now, slept better. And every night, Violet hung the jacket by the door, not hidden in a closet, not buried in a suitcase, but out in the open. It wasn't just a jacket anymore. It was a reminder that her story hadn't ended in that desert. And Nolan, he had changed too. He didn't disappear back into the corporate world. Instead, he showed up at the center, at the park. He brought food on weekends. He learned how to braid Juno's hair badly and helped Ivy build a birdhouse from scrap wood. They never called it anything. Not friendship, not family. It was just what it was. Two people who had been broken in different ways, now standing beside each other, stronger than before. One evening, Violet found Nolan staring at the jacket again. She smiled and said, "It still smells like dust." He laughed quietly. And courage. The community center buzzed with quiet movement as the sun dipped behind the trees. The air smelled of warm bread and fresh paint. Inside, children colored at long tables while a group of volunteers organized donated clothes along the walls. It was the monthly Veteran Support Night, something new the center had started after Violet joined the team. Violet stood near the back, hands tucked in her jacket pockets. She still wore the same army green coat. It didn't protect her from the cold like it once did, but now it gave her something else. It gave her courage. The twins, Ivy and Juno, chased each other between chairs, their giggles bouncing off the walls. For the first time in years, Violet wasn't watching for danger. She was watching joy. Nolan appeared beside her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Big turnout tonight," he said, offering her one. She nodded. "They keep showing up. That's what matters." He smiled but didn't say more. They had grown used to standing together like this, silent but not uncomfortable. A woman approached, clipboard in hand. "Violet, we're ready for you." Violet's heart skipped. Tonight, she wasn't just helping organize. Tonight, she was speaking. The idea had come weeks ago. The board asked Violet to share her experience, hoping it might inspire others. She'd agreed, though every part of her still doubted if her voice really mattered. But something had shifted over the past month. People were listening now. As she stepped onto the small platform at the front of the room, the crowd quieted. Ivy and Juno sat in the front row, legs swinging. Nolan stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. Violet looked out at the room. Faces of strangers, veterans, single parents, teens, old men in worn jackets, women who carried invisible wounds, people who knew pain, people who knew survival. She cleared her throat. "My name is Violet Hart," she began, her voice steady, "and for a long time, I believed silence kept me safe." The room stilled. "I served in a mission that was never supposed to exist. I came back, but according to the world, I didn't. For years, I stayed hidden, not just from people, but from myself. I wore this jacket like armor. It reminded me of what I'd lost, of who I used to be." Her fingers brushed the edge of the jacket sleeve. But then something happened. Something small. Someone saw me, really saw me. And not for the things that had broken me, but for what was still holding me together. She paused, letting the words settle. "I used to think kindness was a trick, that it had to come with conditions, but I was wrong. Kindness doesn't shout. It doesn't demand anything in return. It just shows up, again and again, until you're ready to see it." Her voice caught for just a moment, but she didn't stop. "So now, I'm here to say this to anyone who feels invisible. You are not forgotten. Your pain is real. Your story matters. And it's never too late to start writing the next chapter." The room was quiet. A different kind of quiet. The kind that listens. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes. A young man near the door clutched his dog tags tighter. Ivy smiled, holding her sister's hand. Nolan stepped forward and placed a hand on Violet's shoulder. She turned to him, surprised. But he just whispered, "You were always the voice we needed." After the event, people came up to thank her. They shared stories. They cried. They hugged her. And each time, Violet stood a little straighter, like her past had finally made room for her future. The days that followed moved like gentle waves. Violet took on more work at the center. She helped start a support group for women veterans. Ivy and Juno started school. They brought home finger paintings and stories about new friends. And Nolan, he never left. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't try to change her. He just stayed, steady as a mountain. One Saturday morning, Violet found the girls building a pillow fort in the living room. Juno wore Nolan's old sweater like a cape. Ivy was directing security operations from inside the fort. Violet stood in the doorway, watching them, smiling softly. Her jacket hung by the door, not hidden, not sacred, just there, like a memory that no longer hurt. She stepped outside with a cup of coffee and joined Nolan on the porch. They watched the sunrise paint the sky with soft orange light. "You ever think," Nolan asked, "that we had to break first to find the pieces that mattered?" Violet looked at him, her eyes calm, her voice soft. "Maybe we weren't broken," she said. "Maybe we were just waiting for the right story to find us." And in that moment, without fanfare, without a single dramatic word, something closed gently around them. Just a beginning, Because sometimes the voice that breaks the silence doesn't echo, it stays. And it speaks not for applause, but for the hope that someone else will listen. And maybe, just maybe, find their own voice too.